Hey AP students, it is time for chapter 13 and we are on to the Mongols and interregional empires. So let's get right into the vocab, and our first word on your packet is Gobi Desert. And here we got the Gobi Desert right here. And the Gobi Desert played a huge factor in the way of life for the Mongols. They were a nomadic people who traveled from place to place, which meant they were able to adapt to pretty harsh climates and be able to live in them. So the Gobi Desert is right here. It's a desert that was basically, which will be almost completely in the center of where our Mongol Empire will start and then will spread. Our next word is called a yurt. And here we see some Mongolian yurts. Now, these were houses that were really good if you were a nomadic person. They could be packed up. They could be carried on a number of horses and taken from place to place. So it was a place where you could live if you're a nomad and your home could go with you. And also, they were very, very warm inside. They used a lot of animal fur and such to keep them warm, and Mongols could live inside of them. And people still even can build yurts today. Here's kind of what one looks like on the inside. There's a hole right here for if you had a fire where it could go. That could also be closed at nighttime if it got too cold, but tend to get a bit of smoky if you do that. However, Mongolians are able to travel in all different kind of climates and be warm. And this is a yurt. It's a good place for nomadic living. It's how the Mongols lived. Here's kind of a crazy picture. Yeah, apparently you can get pretty fancy inside them. Nowadays, this is not how the Mongols lived, obviously. But this would be a yurt. So a yurt would be a nomadic house that Mongolians were able to build and travel with. Let's try this again. Marco. Abin. Maybe you got that, maybe you didn't. All right, so let's take a look at, we got Marco Polo here. We're bringing him up again. Marco Polo was a man from Venice, Italy, who went with his father and uncle and was able to travel in the lands of the Yuan, Y-U-A-N, Yuan dynasty, which existed as one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful empire in the world at that time in our era from 600 to 1450. He was able to write back about the amazing things that were going on in Asia, in this empire, in the land today we'd call China for the most part, and that the Mongols had taken over, and then was able to eventually come back and was able to spread these tales after he was in prison in a war that was going on when he returned back to his land in Italy. So this is Marco Polo and his stories, some of them true, some of them he stretched them quite a bit. Were told and got people really interested in Europe and what was going on in Asia and helped spread trade. Khan and Khanites. So the Khan and the Khanites, Khan was basically king or the emperor, like Genghis Khan was a king. Also, we would talk about Kublai Khan, who was a king of a large empire in Mongolia. And then we had Khanites, and Khanites were pretty much lands that were ruled by a Khan or a Mongol king. And if we can see this here, the Mongols had, in this time, there were, after Genghis Khan fell and the Mongol Empire wasn't united, it broke up into parts, but we had 4 parts that were Khanites that the Mongols had that were somewhat unified and also kind of became more separate as time went on. So these basically tells you, I mean, this is like Asia right here. So, I mean, they have most of it. This tells you just how substantial and how much land that the Mongols were able to conquer in this era. Acruel Attack. Be careful, there's a couple different ways to spell this. So, Acruel Attack was basically the Mongols' way of choosing their leaders. And they voted with their feet or with their horses when they rode. If they backed a certain person to be the overall Khan or the king, they would come and they would ride and support him. So it was a very large, basically, meeting of Mongols where they would decide who would be the Khan and who would be their leader. Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, was a time when the Mongols were basically ruling a lot of the trade routes that existed at this time. So if you look at this one right here, they really didn't have that much of India. It wasn't really the best map. If you look at this right here where we have lands that were controlled by the Mongols, most of this is the Silk Road. So the Mongols were basically able to control the Silk Road and were able also to make it more peaceful for traders who didn't have to be at much of a risk of being attacked or robbed. So Pax Mongolica basically meant a time when you could go back and forth if you were a trader, and you could trade because there was pretty much protection because the Mongols offered that because the Mongols promoted trade going back and forth because they made money off it. The Golden Horde was a large section of the Mongol Empire that took over huge parts of, you would see Asia and Europe and a lot of parts of modern-day Russia. Now, their ancestors today, we would call them the Tatars, and the Golden Horde were able to take over a large part of this area and control it for many years until eventually the Russians and with the city of Moscow are able to start and fight against them and start taking their land back. The Battle of Kulikovo was a battle where basically the area of Moscow, or what we call the Russians, were able to defeat the Tatar Mongols. So the Russians from Moscow were able to defeat the Tatar Mongols. Now, what this basically establishes, it doesn't end the Tatars, but it shows the rise of Russia, and that Russia is able to become an empire after this slowly over time when they start taking over more and more land and take their power. It also shows that for the Golden Horde, that in the Tatars, that they will start losing their power as the Mongols start losing power and influence at the end of this era. Baibars was a leader of the Muslim Maluks who was able to make a partnership with the Crusaders who were living in Palestine in the Middle East. Palestine, modern-day Israel, that's the Middle East land right around here. They were able to form a partnership between the Muslim Maluks and also the Christian Crusaders to defeat the Mongols in this area and other Franks that would later come in. And Baibars was a leader who was able to keep this land from coming under total Mongol control at this time. The Ilkhanate was where the Mongols set up their control. Today we would call that the Middle East. You could even refer that to Southwest Asia if you wanted to. And this is where the Mongols were able to take over the city of Baghdad, which was the major cultural center of Islam at this time. And they were also able to take over the land of what we'd call Persia today too, and establish a large and strong kingdom that existed here. And this is really a big deal because at this time, before they'd taken this over, this part of the Muslim world was one of the strongest in the world, and it will come back and will continue to be a very strong power afterwards. But it just shows you how strong the Mongols were. They were able to go in and take over this land and have the Ilkhanate for a while. The White Lotus Society was a group of people in China who resisted the Mongol rule that had been there. So it was basically they were striving and attempting to overthrow the Yuan dynasty, which had taken over China. And over time, this was successful because the Yuan dynasty does fall and is later replaced by the Ming dynasty in China. Okay, so tumens are a way that the Mongols divided up their military. Here's basically how it worked. One soldier, if you had 10 soldiers, they would be grouped together in an arban. Okay, so 10 soldiers are in an arban. 10 arbans would be a jagan. 10 jagans would be a mingan. And 10 mingans are one tumen. So here's what you need to know. A tumen is a way that the Mongols divided up their soldiers into different groups, and they were loyal to each other. So in this arban, these were pretty much like your family, that you protected each other. When you put a bunch of arbans together, they all protected each other as family. So when you got these bigger groups of soldiers, they were really close, they knew each other, they lived together, they worked together. It was a way that the Mongols were able to bring their military together. And it also didn't go by ethnicity. So it didn't go by like you were from the same area. They would put people from different ethnicities into the same arban and say, no, you're Mongols now and you fight in our army. Siege weapons would be weapons that would be used to take over a walled city. Many cities at this time had walls that made them very hard to penetrate or to take over, and the Mongols were able to take some ideas from other civilizations, add them to their own, and make siege weapons, which would allow them to go over the walls, destroy the walls, break into the walls, and then be able to take over the city. This word has come up before, so we'll see it again, siege weapons. Okay? So for the vocab video, good luck on your reading, and the videos are pretty awesome for this chapter. Well, at least I think so. So anyway, see you guys in class. Actually, yeah. So, bye.